Hello, 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 everyone. All right, so we've got a new thing I'm doing here. I've got Joel. Joel is interested in getting some feedback on a session. He's going to be hosting a monthly Zoom session. I get these kinds of inquiries all the time, so I've decided to run a live series where if people want to get a little bit of advice, pick my brain, so to speak, around virtual event design, then I'll invite them and we'll maybe have a person a week. I've got a few already scheduled and a waiting list. So if it's something you're interested in doing, then reach out and I'll see if we can fit you in. And I'm also always available for a private consult if you want to talk about an upcoming virtual event that you're hosting. So I'm Robbie Samuels. I'm a virtual event design consultant and an executive Zoom producer. And here I have Joel, the story advisor. Joel, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Robbie, on such short notice. This is like a real treat. So I'm calling in from outside Zurich, Switzerland, where I've been living for the last 23 plus years, and excited to be here today. Thanks for the opportunity.
And so, Joel, you saw me on an event that Jessica Fabrizi was hosting. It was her birthday party, big bonanza. She invited me to come. So you've been diving a little bit into the content that I have around virtual events and using Zoom. And now you've decided you're going to start hosting a monthly Zoom call for a membership group that you have. Is that correct?
Mostly, I've had we started this association or organization called Zurich Storytellers about 6 years ago. It was to help the speakers. I used to do another show called Ignite. It was like a TEDx thing, to get these really intelligent and amazing people who were, quite bright and fabulous ideas and projects, but they couldn't tell a story. So I started this other storyteller meetup and kept it on meetup.com until a month ago. And I had a focus group among the loyal sort of people who had come the most, and it was split evenly. Half the people wanted educational content, and the other half wanted entertainment. And I had done educational half and half before, but then people started skipping the education and just came for the story slams. So this time I decided let's give them both. Doing the educational part as a Zoom meeting call. I learned from you not to call it a webinar, so thank you. I have really enjoyed your content. I have to say it's short, it's to the point, it's well produced, and I've learned a whole lot in a short amount of time.
Awesome.
So,
Thanks.
so
I'm
yeah,
glad to
we're
hear it.
getting ready. Thursday night this week. It's called. Well, you can check it out on Zurich Storytellers.ch. CH is the domain for Switzerland. And yeah, join us. The link and everything is there. It's free. Hour and 15 minutes.
And just hold on a second because I'm hearing from someone that our stream isn't working on one of the places that it's streaming to. So I'm going to see whether I can find out for myself whether that's the case. I see us on Facebook and I see us. Let's see. I'll check LinkedIn. Sorry, folks, for the disruption here. I want to make sure I'm not missing anybody. And if it's not working, hopefully the replay is going to work for the folks who are sticking around to watch this. It looks like maybe the video's finally shown up. Thank you. All right, a shout out to John Chen. Thank you, John, for keeping me honest and making sure we look good online. It's a little bit of a digital spinach in your teeth moment when a friend of yours lets you know that something's a little bit off about how you're showing up. And I appreciate when people do that, and I'm always going to be the person who does it back. So thank you, John. Shout out to John Chen, who's pretty much a master when it comes to how to use Zoom really effectively for big and fun and exciting events. So, so Joel, it sounds like you've committed to the idea of doing a Zoom, and I also know that in the intake form that you filled out, yes, folks, I have an intake form. Look at that. This is a professional level.
Professional.
You mentioned also thinking about maybe streaming it to. Do you have a Facebook group?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Small.
Okay. So
we've always been doing these live events, right? Except during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, I just haven't been paying enough attention to it. So now we're trying to get deep, go fast, and I'm all ears to hear your suggestions. Yeah, Facebook Live is an option.
So I wanted to actually, let's just parse that out first, because I think there are use cases for doing a Zoom call into a Facebook Live, and then there are times when that isn't necessary and it might be distracting. So the most engagement you're going to get are from people who are in the Zoom call, because they're able to comment in chat, they can see each other, you could do breakout rooms. If you stream to Facebook, let's say, then the people watching on Facebook are probably multitasking even more than the people in the Zoom room.
Yeah.
They're listening in. You can always upload if you have a piece of content. Let's say you did a little bit of education and then you had to get into breakout rooms to discuss something. You can always upload just the part that was the education to your Facebook group as a piece of content with a post to say, hey, if you missed it, here's the education part. You know, what you really missed though was the conversations we had in breakout rooms, which I can't share here. And that's why you want to make sure to put this in your calendar for next time. So if you give people the ability, in my opinion, if you give people the ability to just tune in with half an ear to the Facebook Live, then they won't be making as much of an effort to come to the in-person, not in person, but the live experience in Zoom.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
You also have to then track what people are saying in both these locations. So it would require probably having another person. I mean, it's usually helpful to have a person managing chat with you if you've got a bigger crowd, but that person would also be like trying to keep an eye on comments coming in through Facebook Live. So there are times when I think it can be really helpful, and if you've got a huge audience, but I think mostly I would try to attract people into the Zoom itself, and then upload just the portion of the talk that is the full room presentation. But I think for you, having a mix of presentation and an opportunity for people to talk to each other in small groups would be really great. Oh, John Chen says, never lead a virtual meeting alone. Agreed. Thank you,
So
John.
Robbie, if I could just stop you for a second, I have a question on that last
Sure.
suggestion. I hadn't planned on a breakout room for this Zoom. I'm calling actually a story building Zoom Q&A Zoom call. So um, I have no idea. It's the first one for this organization. We have like 1,000 members, but the most people, like over the last year, it's dwindled to like 20 to 30 people per meetup. So I don't know if
That's
it's
still a
going to.
good number, by the way. And I want to talk about doing Zoom with breakout rooms if you're
Good.
willing to have
Okay.
that conversation, because content can be had from a lot of sources. I mean, like we just said, they can just watch the replay.
Mhm.
What would make someone want to show up live?
So they could ask their questions live. I'm thinking, right?
They can still pose questions in the replay and you're going to answer them. What's
True.
something they can't get from a replay?
The emotion of the event itself.
Being
Right?
there, and
Yeah.
also getting a chance to meet people. So events
Hmm.
are about content and connection. It's
Hmm.
why we got on planes and traveled so far away. It wasn't just for the information, but for the possibility of who we're going to meet. And I think people really miss that. And it's not that they want some big 1,000-person event. No, they'd rather be in a room with a handful of people having a conversation, testing out maybe the technique you just taught. So I would suggest that you create a monthly event that has some kind of, opening. I would do at least a 10-minute open.
Hmm.
By that, I mean 10 minutes before you do any kind of breakout room, because I've seen also people try to get people to breakout rooms so quickly and people come late and it's hard to set them up. So I would say at least a 10-minute introduction. It could be 30 minutes if you really want to dive deep into a piece of content, and then have breakout rooms set up. And you can be randomly assigned, but giving people a chance to talk about what they just, what their favorite takeaway from that moment, or
So,
maybe take turns trying something out, that kind of thing. Small
so
group.
but just a second. This 10-minute open. So in our live shows, in-person shows, we do a 15-minute warm-up activity.
Mm-hmm.
An example is instead of just people saying their name, their profession, where they're, what country they're from, I usually give a prompt. So tell us your name, and I'll just use an example. And now tell us in 1 or 2 minutes, no more, what was, where, and with who, and how did it make you feel the first time you were kissed? Or it could be the first job you earned money at, or it could be the first apartment, that you rented on your own. So it's a bit of a game to help break the ice. We associate now a little story, a tiny one, but a thumbnail story with a name, and it becomes more, I don't know, intimate, I think. And that's typically what we do in person. Not everybody has to do it. Depends on how much time we have. Are you suggesting that I do a lecture or a seminar style intro, or do you think we should continue to use, or should I use
I
a game
I
activity?
think a gamification is always great. My friend Bobby Carlton runs an weekly event for something called Innovation Women, and she actually does something a little different than you, but she gets everybody in the room gets a chance to introduce themselves, but they have 15 seconds, and there is a clock on the
Hmm.
calendar that there's a countdown clock that's visible called Blue Timer. Blue Sky Timer is this thing you can. It's a plugin for Zoom. It's free. If you use it like once a month, it's free. I think there's a small charge if you use it more often.
Hmm.
But we are all in gallery view and we see the timer. And so everyone gives a really quick elevator. Hello, this is who I am. This is what I do. Blah, 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 like, and then people can throw like additional information to chat. And she gets sometimes 50 people, but she has to move through them really fast, right?
Yeah.
Because we want to get to the content of the event, not the introductions. That's not the content of the event. And so I guess I'd wonder, as you're designing that, is it because you want people to get a chance to tell a little story? Is it really warming them up to the idea of story? And so do you want to have 10 examples, or do you really want to have, if it's 20 or 30 people, if you do that times 2 minutes or 90 seconds even on average, that's a lot of time.
Yeah. Typically in person, we do maybe 5 or 6 max. So
Okay.
it's set up to use 15 to 20 minutes max.
So you'd pick a few people. Are they
Yeah.
self-nominating?
Usually you can tell who is, ready to be spontaneous and who isn't. And
It's
if they're
harder to do
not,
that on virtual. So what I would
sure.
recommend doing is using the raised hand function, which they'll find under the reactions button, which is in the
Hmm.
bottom right. And
Sure.
so the instruction would be, or you can say like put something in chat, but it's easier if you do the raised hand function. They literally queue up, and you can open the participants window, which is down here on the bottom left of Zoom, and you'll see the order in which people raise their hands. And so you can say, okay, first up, and you want to do this thing that I call on deck. First up, we're gonna have Bob. Bob, here's the instructions. Okay, Bob, it's your turn. And when you're done, it's going to be Mary's turn. And so Mary kind of goes, oh, I better pay attention.
And get ready for her
I
turn.
wasn't really listening to what the instructions were. Let me see what Bob does. And then it's like, thanks, Bob. That was great. All right, Mary, it's your turn. And remember, it's that dun dun. And then after that, it's going to be Nancy. And Nancy goes, I better pay attention. So you always have someone on deck. You
Yep.
don't have to repeat the instructions each time, but maybe every now and again to reset. And particularly if someone goes a little past what you wanted them to, you want to quickly catch that. Because let's say you gave some instruction of 1 to 2 minutes and someone takes 5. If you don't reset after that person, everybody after that thinks the instruction is to speak for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you then course correct on the third person after that, they'll be like, I'm doing what everyone else did. Like, why are you calling me out?
You had a nice explainer video on that feature where you say thank you 1,000 times, but you get them to shut up.
Yes, that's the how to interrupt.
That's right. Yeah.
How to interrupt. So other thing I would suggest doing is spending a moment before you do the 5 or 6 people exercise is doing a little bit of a Zoom orientation. And I've got a video about that as well, where you really sort of say, hey, everyone, here's how we're going to be using Zoom. I'd like you to update your name to include your location. Whatever it is, like, if you have a question and you want me to see it, go ahead and write it in chat, put the word question in all caps beforehand so I don't miss it, right? And that kind of thing. And I would recommend having another person available who's going to keep an eye on chat for you and track those kinds of, questions or anything confusing that people need to be addressed. If you're focusing on sharing something, you want other people to help you manage what the reactions are, because you're going to be doing what I'm doing, which is looking at the camera as much as possible. So you may not see everybody else's reactions depending on your setup.
For sure. Excellent. All right, so we're now into, we've got the event on its feet. It's running, and now we transition to a Q&A. How would you suggest running that?
So if it's purely Q&A,
not purely. I mean, it's a bit like Jessica did with you last week, or I don't know when it was, 10 days ago.
Yeah, so this is idea of a mastermind format, which, by the way, you might want to call it that. You might actually get more of a response. There's a couple of formats to masterminds that I've seen work really well. The word mastermind has gotten overused. So like 100-person, Facebook groups or 1,000-person Facebook groups call themselves a mastermind, and that's a misnomer. So a mastermind would be 4 people with or without a facilitator who each get 30 minutes on the hot seat, or it could be way more people. But the idea is that you collect questions and then you select which questions that you're going to raise up and address. And occasionally that question is going to become a hot seat. A hot seat is when we're doing kind of what we're doing now, where like we're really diving deep into your like question and your scenario and what's going on in your life. But other questions don't require all of that. It's definitely about trying to make as many questions universally applicable as possible. So I run these not through chat. I've actually done something a little differently when I do this, and I usually have a max of 12 people. So you have to think about how you want to do this. But I've done it where I've had I know who's registered, so people fill out the Zoom registration. I know who's coming, and then I set up a Google Doc. And at the top, I have instructions, and the instructions basically say, like, here's the agenda for today. And we're going to start by taking a moment to give people a few minutes to write their questions on this document. Find your name, and all their names are listed alphabetically with space in between. And after your name, write all your questions out. And when you're done, read all the other questions. And then at the end of any question that you're like, oh, I want to know that too, put your name. So do a little plus me.
Okay, so I'm seeing a spreadsheet here. I've got the names.
I usually do it a Google Doc, not
Sure,
a sheet, the doc version. But yeah,
sure, but there are names.
Yep.
And the names are followed by you have this instruction and stuff at the top. But then there's space for them to write in their question.
Yep.
All right. And what was with the little plus? I have that too.
So basically, if I wrote a question that's like, why is the sky blue? And you're like, oh, I've been wondering that, you would say plus Joel. And so I would know, well,
after that person's
facilitating,
name.
After that person's question, after that particular question. And that way, whoever's facilitating knows more than one person is wondering this. And you as a facilitator use that information to know which questions to sort of rise to the surface fastest. And some questions are going to require a lot more background. And the people who need to write more background, that's usually more of a hot seat question. Or you can even have a section that says like, I want a hot seat, and you might have space for like 2 of those where you're going to dig in a little deeper. But really it's something you learn how to do. You master just flowing through, and the general kind of things people are going to ask. And so you might get a couple of like basic questions out of the way first. Let's just all get on the same page. There's some vocabulary, whatever it is. Oh, here's an interesting example. Let me just, here's a question that Mary just asked. Mary. And then what I do is, as I answer each question, I bold the question to signify to me that I've answered it.
All right. So everybody's looking at the same Google Doc. And what did you call them? A facilitator is picking.
That's you.
Okay. So, And the person on the hot seat is the one who asked the question.
Who wants a little more in-depth focus.
Right.
So most people, it's just going to be, oh, Mary had a question about why the sky is blue. Let me share a little bit about why that is.
Do you let them ask the question again, or do you
just read it out loud?
You just keep them out of, even though you call it a hot seat, it's really not. They're not.
No. So there's a difference between a hot seat and a question. A question is just simple. Like you read out the question and you answer it. A hot seat is, okay, Joel, I saw that you wrote in here, you've got an event coming up and you want to talk through the specifics of it. Now that's specific to you, right?
Right.
Not everyone has that event coming up. So this is like a hot seat is when it's personal to you question. And you don't want to do a lot of those unless you can really extrapolate to the audience who's listening in why this is relevant to them. So I'm always like, oh, just like Joel had to think about this thing, when you're doing your next event, you think about this too. And like you try to make it more universal. But a hot seat is when it's digging deeper into a specific question. So most of them are just questions, and then you'll have time for a couple of hot seats. A hot seat is when you're going to dig a little deeper, in which case it would be back and forth with you and that other person.
Got it. Okay. Thank you, Claire.
And you can have a spot on the sheet that says sign up for a hot seat, and with 3 or 4 or 5 spots, and say, I'm not sure how many we're going to get to, but if you have a question like that, or what I've just generally done is had everyone write their questions out under their names. And I can tell if some of these are going to be a little more of that back and forth. I just invite them to unmute and share.
So do you send that sheet in advance of the event, or
you have an option? You can. If you are asking people to sign up through a Zoom registration form, you could have this link in the confirmation email that goes out and hope that some people fill it out. But I would still assume that you're going to need to spend a few minutes at the very beginning. So as soon as people come in, continuously put it into the chat and just sort of say, hey, we'll be started in a moment, but I'd like you to focus on filling out your questions. And then we're going to dive into a couple of intros. And then we're going to get into these questions.
Okay. Sorry to get into the mechanics so deeply, but you put a link to a Google Doc.
Make sure that it's a shareable Google Doc. So it needs to be not just viewable, but editable by anyone with the link.
Right. And so everybody keeps that doc open, or at least you do, as well as the Zoom window.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. So for that, people need to take Zoom out of full screen mode.
Right.
So if they take Zoom out of full screen mode, then they can have the Zoom window over here and they can have the doc over here, or vice versa. Right.
Got it. Great idea.
And that way you don't have to constantly go up and down through chat. And what I've also done is, and because everyone wants to introduce themselves or give some context, you could invite, what I've said is, after you're done writing your question, reading all the other questions and putting plus me, plus your name, then write your introduction, answer these 3 things in chat. And the order, they all put something in chat. And then I usually go around and have each person say a quick, what do you hope to get out of today? And the order in which I go is based on the order in which they introduce themselves in chat. So by people starting to introduce themselves in chat, it indicates to me that they're done. People are starting to move to done with the questions portion. And I'm like, okay, listen, we're now going to shift to a quick hello.
Yeah.
And that could just literally be, I want to know, say your name so we know that we're pronouncing it correctly, and your pronouns if you'd like, and which I always encourage people to put on their Zoom name. And then, what do you hope to get out of today's conversation? And meanwhile, who they are in the world is in chat. They don't have to repeat that. We can always reference that. If we're like, oh, Joel's asking really interesting questions, I want to know more about Joel. Scroll up. Oh, I see. I know who Joel is. I like having that information in chat, and people can always save that chat. And then you can either have everyone do a quick hello, or you can just say, we've got time for a couple of introduction. You could do your story thing. Now realize the questions piece is probably, I've done it for up to 10 minutes. I've done 2-hour programs for Q&A where 10 minutes is eaten up by people filling out this coming in, not all being on time, filling out this doc, and then you spend another 10 minutes doing some kind of introduction, like icebreakery type thing, and then you've got the rest of the time for Q&A.
Okay. Sounds like it's going to be more time consuming than 5 or 10 minutes, but okay. So the chat is for sort of determining the order of choosing.
So the chat was
intros.
the chat for me was so people could write a little bit about who they are.
Yeah.
And that would stay in chat, and participants can find it later. And if I wanted everyone to go around quickly, not 1 or 2 minutes, more like 3 sentences, say your name and what did you hope to get out of today? That's just so you have a better sense of what people like. I'm always purpose first in my design, and with Q&A and mastermind formats, it's a little harder because you don't always have a clear sense of what people do want to get out of the experience of being there. And so you're designing a kind of open format. But if you hear a certain theme coming up a lot,
sure,
then you would shift towards that, whether that's in the introductions or that's in the Q&A, the questions that are coming in. So you may not get to every question, but if you see a certain focus, and then you can say the ones we didn't get to, happy to, like, I'll shoot you notes after, or that'll become the focus for the next one, or yeah.
Got it. Good stuff.
Yeah, and you can also decide if you might get more participation by making this a limited number of seats.
You had mentioned that earlier. You had 12. What did you say? You had 4 people. Blah blah blah. Where did
The
it go
4
here?
people is a different format.
Oh, excuse me.
But 12 to 15, maybe 20 would fit well with this format. But you might even say, like, this is a limited number of seats. Like, make it a thing. Because then you'll get people committed to coming, and it won't be. You probably get a core group that keeps coming back who will know what's going on, and
yeah, the law of scarcity, it's called.
There is, right? You also you could say that it's open to more people, but you aren't gonna just make sure that the expectations around how you're gonna handle questions gets handled right.
Well, and also what happens when number 13 shows up and you've said 12?
Well, you would close registration. You would say the first 12 people who register, that kind of thing. You would just cap it.
The difficulty here is using multiple platforms for people to sign up.
I think you would be fine. Try it where you're opening it to everybody.
I really don't expect at the beginning, especially the first one, it's going to be a problem. I really don't.
Try it. You know what? Here's the thing, Joel. Judge yourself on the last 3, not your first 3. Like, every time you do, it's going to be a learning experience. So you should do this monthly. A year from now, you're going to be like, wow, we are so much better at this.
Well, thanks to people who offer advice like yourself. I'm really taken, I guess, by what you've done with adversity and turned it into a new profession, really. I got fired from my corporate job 7 months after I helped engineer an IPO.
Wow.
And it was so unfair, right? But it was like the universe knew what it was doing, because it allowed me to reinvent myself. It took me a year to get over the resentment, but once I did, I realized I have a better opportunity, doing what I do now, than I would ever have had staying in that corporate suite. So, even though you probably didn't think it was a gift at the time COVID came along and put you out of the event, live, or what do you call it, in-person event business.
Yeah, which we didn't call in-person events back then.
No, it was just events, right?
Just events. Yeah.
Yeah, and now here you are on top of the new hierarchy of event producers. So now
awesome. Thank you for that observation.
I take inspiration from people like you. So yeah.
I appreciate that. And I think others learned something from what we talked about today. I will definitely take time to review comments left in the replay. on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. So I'll check out if you want to add any comments for me or Joel, any suggestions for him, or ideas for new topics for me. We're all for it. Joel, good luck. We can't wait to hear how this all goes for you, and we will talk to you soon. Bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
Robbie.